Morning, people. In today's episode of The Tories Just Hate Young People, in 2018 a school's roof collapsed over the weekend because it was made of this special concrete that's designed with bubbles in it, but those bubbles can weaken over time until eventually... And at the time, the local government association warned that we should probably figure out how many schools have this reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete in them so we can, keep children alive. And yet, despite going through a pandemic where almost all schools were closed anyway, so we could have checked this out without having to disrupt kids' classes, here we are now having to close over 100 schools, and as for precisely how many schools have this concrete in them, ask Education Secretary Gillian Keegan.
I mean, there's been stories of thousands of more cases expected. It will not be in that nature. If it's
won't
similar
be thousands.
to what we've
Will
seen,
it be hundreds?
It could be.
Now, I'm not sitting here as some kind of expert in school infrastructure, so I'm just going to let the words and actions of these Tories speak for themselves. Because in terms of figuring out which schools were at risk, this is what she said.
It is not the job of the Department for Education, but we chose to do that because we wanted to make sure that we had that information centrally.
But you're saying that the government is not responsible, ultimately, for the safety of children in schools?
The school building's responsibility is with local authorities.
Interesting. So central government, specifically the Department of Education, is not responsible for the safety of children. Where have I heard something similar?
4 out of 10 children in parts of Barrow are born into poverty. That's not good enough, is it?
Well, it's appalling. And of course, but everybody, and it's not just people in Westminster, it's not just at a national level, it's at a local level through the
It's the government, and you've had nearly 10 years.
Well, it's not the government though, is it? I mean, everybody just says it's the government, as if it's this sort of like bland blob that, you can just go and blame.
So the government's not responsible for poverty?
It's not, because it's all parts of society and the structures. Local authorities have a role to play, education, public services, which are locally led and locally run.
So basically, the position of the Tory government is poverty, child safety.
What they gotta do with me?
But it does have something to do with them, because they've explicitly made it worse. You just heard Gillian Keegan try to shift the responsibility and therefore the blame onto local government. But remember how that school collapsed in 2018, and the local government association said we need to take this issue seriously. But what did Gillian Keegan do in 2018? She voted to reduce the funding of local government by 28%. And in 2019, she voted to lower the funding of local government by 56%. And would you look at that? So did Rishi Sunak. Shifting the responsibility for keeping children alive onto local government, while at the same time actively weakening local government, is wild. Especially as it turns out that Rishi Sunak cut the funding specifically for dealing with crumbling schools, which of course he denies.
You as Chancellor didn't allow that to go ahead and in fact cut that budget. Are you to blame for what's happening now? And do you want to apologise to parents and pupils?
No, I think that is completely and utterly wrong. Actually, one of the first things I did as Chancellor in my first spending review in 2020 was to announce a new 10-year school rebuilding programme for 500 schools. Now, that equates to about 50 schools a year that will be refurbished or rebuilt.
Whereas the original funding was for 100 schools a year. So congratulations, you just admitted to cutting the funding by half. Now again, I'm not an expert. I don't have the expertise to tell you whether we could afford to fix those schools at the time. But what I can do is point to Rishi Sunak's own words. Because his words tell us whether he was prioritising the right things in terms of where our tax money should go.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas. Then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
It's crazy that we don't see that clip on the news every single week because it explains everything they do. So when the next school or hospital collapses and they say it's not their responsibility, you know why. Oh God, I was about to end this video and then I just saw this.
But we will get a plan, and every single one of them will be done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Jesus bloody Christ! Hundreds of schools are closing because of risk of collapse. One of them did collapse on your watch, and then you cut the funding of local government, which you then say is responsible for fixing that problem, and now you want a pat on the back? What? We need an election, please! I'm Femming. Have a great week.